Hello friend, I am sure glad that you could join me today. Today we talk about Bob Ross Art of Chill game, which is a game about Bob Ross, one of my favorite human beings. I love his show, not because I want to learn how to paint, but just because I love to listen to him, to his soothing voice, to the Zen philosophy that he seems to express. I love to see him paint, but most of all, I love the illusion that I'm hanging out with such an interesting and fascinating human being. Now, why don't I show you what I've done so far? First, I've set up the canvas of the first paints that we will try to paint in the game. There are several of them, actually there is a really good number, and they are double-sided. Each painting has three features, three iconic Bob Ross features such as fluffy clouds, almighty mountains, happy little trees, etc, etc. I'm just sad there isn't the rock that lives down here, but well, nothing is perfect. This is how the world works. We have a track of spaces here, and we place a token representing Sensei Bob in the leftmost space. As we paint and as we play, the token will move, and we will finish the paint when Bob reaches the last space, at which point we will select another painting that we will be working on, or a painting is also considered finished if a player has painted all of the three features. What do we have here? We have the turn track, so players will place their score token on the first space, and as they score point, they will move it all around here. The first player to reach the maximum chill possible will win the game. Also, here we place a deck of cards representing what in other games we call random events. In this game we call them chill happenstances. They will generate random events, of course, that will alter the state of the game in some way, but we will also dispense small insightful sentences by Bob, such as "you really can learn to be creative as you paint," or "just beat the devil out of it," one of my favorite expressions, and so on and so forth. Each of these is like an haiku. You read it twice and somehow you will reach some sort of enlightenment. Of course, we cannot paint without a good technique and without supplies. There is a deck of supply cards. Each represents a paint and a brush in different combinations, and there will be a number of them available face up during the game. Also, there will be techniques. Each represents a single paint or a single brush, and again we shuffle the deck and we make some of them available at the beginning of the game. Then, of course, you need your palette. Your palette will look such as this one. Each player has a palette of a certain color that will be associated with a scoring marker and with three squares made of cardboard, and we will see what those are for. Each palette has two areas, and each area has three slots. During the game, you will play paint cards on your palette, but what is very, very important is that when you play paints in the same area of your palette, they count as mixed together. From that point on, you have to consider them as a single game piece. They still represent red and green, but for example, in this example, you have to use them together or discard them together. Anything that happens to them happens together. The bond between mixed colors is unbreakable, at least within the game. And then also you have the wild card color. Now, what happens is that each round you can take two actions, and there is a large number of actions that you can choose from. But before you do so, at the beginning of your round, when it is your turn, you will roll this die. Players will alternate taking turns. So you roll the die, resolve the effect, take two actions, and the next player goes. When you roll the dice, several things may happen. Sometimes you get to paint for free, sometimes you get an extra card, sometimes you get an extra action. Very often you roll the iconic silhouette of Bob. When that happens, you move the Bob marker on the paint by one space, and we get closer and closer to the end of the paint or the painting. Also, as you can see, there are certain symbols there. They represent different bonuses. If you paint a certain feature before Bob gets to that space or past that space, then you get the corresponding bonus. Otherwise, you will still score it, but not with that bonus. Now, what we do, as we said, after you roll the die and possibly move the Bob marker, you can take two actions. The actions may be to draw a card from the supply deck or from the supply line, in which case you can draw blindly or simply take one of the cards. If you take it, it is replenished immediately because we always want our paints and our tools available. And you will add that to your hand of cards and paints, and brushes. Another thing that you can do is to discard two cards that correspond to one of the available techniques. For example, I discard two bright reds and I acquire the bright red technique. When I do so, when I acquire a technique, I immediately score 2 points, which is very sweet. And I will also then be able to score extra points when I complete a feature that contains that technique. And the same applies if, for example, I discard two cards with that kind of brush, then I can acquire that technique. I'm particularly proficient when using it, score 2 points, and if I use that brush, again, it will be good for me. For an action, I can take a card from my hand and play it on my palette in any available slot with the paint side face up. And again, remember, when you place cards in the same area of your palette, you are committed. You're committed because from that point on you cannot separate them again. So sometimes you will want to clean your palette. For a single action, you can remove all of the cards from one of the two areas of your palette. Another thing that you can do, if you don't like the supplies that are available here, for an action you can discard all of the ones that are face up and replenish the line. But remember, we're here to beat the devil out of paintings, to listen to Bob's wisdom, but we're also here to actually paint the features that you see on the canvas. For an action, and if you have the right cards, the right components, you can paint a feature. To do so, you need to discard the correct colors from your palette. The correct colors, and only those. You don't want to mess things up. You don't want to have colors in there that don't really apply, that don't matter. For example, suppose that we're trying to paint the happy little trees that we see here. Then we need to have on our palette a green, a brown, and a yellow. And we need to be able to discard them in a way that we discard those only. For example, if this is the situation on my palette, then I have a green, a brown, and a yellow. Yes, indeed, I do. And if I discard all of these cards and I discard the correct brush from hand, then I have completed that feature. I would have been able to do the same, of course, if these were here or if these were here. It doesn't matter if the correct colors are mixed. However, remember, we can only paint if we have the correct colors. We don't want any incorrect colors. If this was the case, for example, I would not be able to use this set to complete that feature because the feature doesn't require white, and in order to play these cards I would have to also include the white. So that's what I said this is what I meant when I said that when you mix colors together, you are committed. So what happens when you complete a feature? Well, first you completed a feature. That partially is its own reward. You are more of an artist than you were before. Second, you score points. Very important. You score a point for each paint in the feature that you completed. In this case, that would be 3 points. But then you may be able to score points from other sources too. remember, there will be these chill cards here. Oh, I think I forgot to say that. You know me, sometimes I forget stuff. When you roll the Bob symbol, you move Bob and you also draw a chill card. Very often Bob will move, sometimes, as you can see, he won't. That, however, means that there will be usually an active Bob card that will simply be replaced by a new one when we roll Bob again and a new card becomes available. The Bob card may allow us to score extra points. For example, when this one is face up, then we learn an extra chill point by painting a feature with sap green, which it just so happens that we did. So we score an extra point because of that. If the feature that we painted uses any brush or paint for which we have a technique card, we score an extra point. In this case here we do have the fan brush, and so we do that. If I also had this card here, then by painting that feature we get 2 extra points because I'm using 2 of my techniques. Also remember, there are those bonuses there. And so if we are painting a feature that corresponds to one of these bonuses and Bob hasn't covered it or passed it yet, then we also score that one. If, for example, right now we painted the Almighty Mountains on top of all of the rest, we would also get to score an extra point. So when the stars are right, you can score a lot of points when you're able to get not just the feature but also to collect all of the bonuses. Plus, also being the first player to paint a certain feature will give you points. You place one of your squares under the feature that you are painting on the topmost available space, and you score the corresponding bonus. So if I'm the first player to paint the happy little trees, I will get a +2. The next player to paint that will get a +1, and the other players won't get any bonus. That's sad, but not everybody can get everything. So you collect points for painting features, you collect resources to be able to complete features, and when you've scored enough points to reach maximum chill, you have won the game, and you have become Bob's most trusted pupil, Bob's best friend. No, everybody's Bob's best friend. But in any case, when you get there, you have won the game. I bought the game simply because I'm a big fan of Bob Ross, and I was curious to play a game that was inspired by his show, but more than the show really, his personality, or at least that's what I hoped. And then lo and behold, I'm sure I'm not the only one that bought it because of the theme, but then when it comes to the game, it turns out that it's a really fine game of set collection. When it comes to games of this category, it is at the present time the favorite game in my group and also the favorite game in my family. It is so simple that in fact my 8-year-old and my 6-year-old can play it, and can play it well, can play it quote-unquote for real, not like we need to simplify rules or we need to be to cut out things. No, they're playing the full game, and sometimes the 8-year-old wins, some of the times the 6-year-old wins without any help from the adults. And that tells you what a great player I am. I can be beaten by a 6-year-old even though I'm not necessarily trying to let her win. And at the same time I played with my regular group, just with adults, and they loved it too. Because there are enough decisions here, there are interesting things that made the game definitely enjoyable. While it also remains, again, so simple that you can play with children or you can play it with completely casual players that may be a little disoriented the first minute or two because they're used to games with 2 or 3 rules, but then it clicks, it really clicks. You tell them at the beginning it's about getting the techniques from those sets and score them, and that in a nutshell is the game. But then what you have here is in fact a nice little ways of a lot of different small ways of incrementing your scoring. And a lot of those are based on limited availability. The technique cards, those are very valuable, very powerful. If you get them early on, you can score a lot. In fact, I would recommend investing on those early on. But it's a limited thing. If you get that color, I'm not going to develop the same technique. When it comes to each painting, again, painting a certain feature before Bob covers it or goes past it or covering it before somebody else does. That's the difference between, say, maybe 4 extra points as opposed to 0. 0 if I'm the third player and Bob passed it. 4 if Bob has not covered a +2 bonus and I'm the first player to paint that feature. So you really have a lot of interesting elements there. The game also has more variety than I expected, because there are games in which Bob is just painting like a maniac, goes through one painting after the other, because the die roll gives us a lot of Bob symbols. And so there is a way that you deal with that, of course, which is, well, when you see that you're towards the end of the game, toward the edge of a painting, well, you don't know, you're not going to put many colors on your palette because you don't know what the next colors are going to be. So you maybe try to stock up on resources, you try to get technique cards. At times, it looks like there's still a lot of time, and then you are investing on what is there. You're still seeing, okay, what can I do now that will be valuable before somebody else takes that opportunity. The fact that the extra scoring possibilities are limited, are based on what the players haven't grabbed yet, that simple fact is so simple, so linear, and yet it really adds a lot of fun to the design. A lot of like, oh gosh, why did you do so? Like, oh, that player won and I was one card away from winning 2, and that also, if he hadn't painted the fluffy little clouds a turn before me, then I would be there. In fact, actually, games have been quite close, quite tight, which is good. It means everybody, or almost everybody, feels involved and feels like they have a chance of winning until the end. At the same time, it hasn't been so tight that the game, well, is mechanicistic, and everybody just does the same algorithm every time, and that's why we all have the same result. You really have a sense that investing on the right resources in an environment in which you're trying to do so before the other people really pays off. You only get a small margin of advantage, but it's satisfying to get that margin, and when you win, you do get the sense that in fact you deserve it, you worked right, you worked well. So, also because, say, you don't roll dice, there's a random element that comes from the event cards that Bob produces when you roll his symbol. There are, of course, random resources, and from time to time I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna chance it and get it from the deck and I hope I get something. But in most cases, really, although the resources that are given to you are random, they also share with others, and so there's a lot of agency that the randomness affects almost all players equally. And so there is that. It really feels meritocratic. It is a game that is so simple to understand, with such a pleasant theme, with such good-looking components, and yet it also has an accessible price, and well, it is fun to play, which is of course the most important thing. Bob Ross, whether you're a fan of the show or not, I do recommend that you give this game a try. It has pleased a lot of different people in my experience. It may work well with you and with your group, and definitely you don't need to know Bob Ross. I've also played with people that, believe it or not, did not know about Bob. I don't know how I feel about that, but I know how they felt about the game, which is they liked it. Pretty much everybody enjoyed it, from children to hardcore gamers. Everybody found something to like in Bob Ross, The Art of Chill game.